right, everybody, welcome back. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Sylvester's Inspires Belief Cast. I'm thankful once again to be here with an opportunity to have you guys hear an amazing story from an amazing person, Tessa Yates. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Todd.
Yeah.
I have been listening to your podcast recently, so I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm excited to hear your story. But before we get into any of that, I do need to thank our sponsor, Veracity Networks. They've been so great to me in this podcast, and so I need to give a shout out to them. And I want to thank all of you listeners for all your support. We're reaching out to a lot of people who have been struggling, who have been inspired by the messages, and today's going to be no different. And Tess and I work together at Wasatch Recovery, yes. And I've known you probably now. How long have you been here? I
will have worked here for a year in August, so almost a year.
Wow. Okay, that's gone by fast.
Yep.
So tell our listeners what's your position here at Wasatch.
Okay, so I am the recreational therapist. Pretty much, people are like, "What even is that?"
Yeah, what is that?
It's not a very known career, but I love what I do, and I love it because I almost get to reintroduce people on just how to enjoy life,
right,
and have new experiences that they haven't had before,
right.
And just introduce them into this idea that recreation and physical activity or art or all these different modalities can just help heal their mind and body, because they are so important. The mind and the body work together.
For sure.
So just having, the therapists here and then having the rec program, they just work so well together.
They really do. Yeah. And you've done this before. You used to work at another treatment center and what have you. But from the time that I've known you, I mean, you're fantastic at what you do.
Thank you.
And what I love most about you is just your positive attitude. I've never seen you in a bad mood. I mean, and I'm not just saying this, that's the truth. Like you're positive. The residents will always respond, man, she's just so fun to be around because she's just so energetic. And truly, when you say you help people enjoy life again, it's truly what you're doing. And I've been on some of your experientials, and we go to play some volleyball, and it's just a blast. And I think fun. I told you even last week, I needed that.
Yeah.
We went and played volleyball with the residents, and I afterwards told you, I thank you for letting me come. I needed that.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't realize you need it until you just do it.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's been so beneficial to me. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and we get clients who come here who they haven't played like that since they were maybe in elementary school.
Oh, and I'll have them in an art group or, volleyball, or just going to the gym, and I ask them, when's the last time you did this? And it's just kind of crickets.
Yeah.
Or when did you do this in your addiction? And again, crickets. It's
right.
just, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I want everyone to kind of get to know you even more so. And I'm so grateful you're willing to share your story, because you've got a great one. So let's kind of start. Where did you grow up, and a little bit about your family?
Okay. So I grew up in good old Murray, Utah. Yeah. I don't know why I put good old before that. I don't know. Just
good old. It sounds good.
Old. But I've been in the same house that I was born and raised in. I currently still live with my parents, so I'm still in that house in Murray. I went to Parkside Elementary, Hillcrest Junior High, Murray High School.
Yeah.
And then to BYU after that, where I got my degree in recreational therapy.
Okay.
And then there's my mom and my stepdad, and I have 2 brothers, 2 stepbrothers, and 2 stepsisters.
Oh, really?
So we've got a big family once we all combined, which I think is so fun.
Yeah.
I love my siblings, and
right.
I love the connections we have with each other.
When did your parents divorce? How old were you when that happened?
My parents divorced when I believe I was 6.
Okay.
And I was talking to my mom about this podcast last night and trying to just go over, there's a lot of gray areas in my childhood, especially with like when things happened. And we're just trying to be like, when did this happen? And when did this happen? But I'm pretty sure I was 6. So I was probably going into 1st grade when my parents got divorced.
Right. Do you remember any of that when you think back on it?
The actual divorce?
Well, just like knowing that, okay, dad's not in the house or mom, they've separated or whatever it was, like, do you remember going, okay, this is weird or it's hard, or do you remember that?
I do have this memory, and we'll get more into kind of why my dad wasn't there, but I do have this memory of when I was very young and I was at my friend's house and my mom asked me to come over and say goodbye to my dad. She's like, he's going to be leaving for some time. And I was annoyed because I was like, I'm playing with my friends. But I do remember that memory of her saying, okay, give your dad a hug. We won't see him for a while. And I didn't really understand why or what was going on, but it was a little weird for me. But I felt like my mom and my brother stepped in so much that it was pretty normal until I got older and realized more things.
Yeah, as you get older, you kind of go, okay, you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and maybe you get more information from mom and things like that. And so, so growing up, I mean, talk about that. I mean, what were some of the maybe things that you did, some challenges that maybe you went through as a young kid?
Yeah, so the reason my dad wasn't in the pictures because he started using cocaine when I was about 5 years old. And so that's the reason for my parents' divorce. And that cocaine use has continued up to my age now, where I'm 23 and he's still struggling with that.
So a long time, yeah.
A long time, yeah, almost, I guess, 20 years.
Yeah.
But so that at an age of 5, that's when that whole began. And it went from my mom being a stay-at-home mom, her picking me up from kindergarten and being there every day, to almost like the rug just being swept out from underneath us.
Right.
Where mom now had to work full-time jobs, and it was chaotic for a second because we were just trying to readjust into this new life without my dad. And I think, and this has continued with me for a while, but at a young age, I had this idea of like, I needed to be perfect. And I think because I saw that it was hard for my mom to make that adjustment.
Right.
As I got more into elementary school, I really wanted things to be perfect for her when she got home. So I would always clean the house before she got home. And if my brothers were fighting, I would freak out. Like, don't fight. But
right, because you wanted to keep things
I wanted to control those things I felt like I could control.
Yeah.
Because there's things I couldn't.
Right.
And just, I think this is the funniest story, but in 4th grade, I failed a moon phase test. Still remember it. And I went home and I bawled because I was like, I'm not going to get an A. I'm not going to get an A in that class because I failed this test. And I was like, and then I'm not going to get into BYU because I have bad grades. And that was in 4th grade. And I already had this sense that I had to have things just so in order to be successful.
Okay.
And that did follow me for quite some time.
Well, it's kind of like almost, you're when you know that your mom and dad have separated and divorced, and you obviously can't control that at your age, and now you're trying to control things. It's almost like you're overcompensating because of maybe what you were dealt with there, and you're thinking, okay, but if I do all these things, then everything will be okay.
It'll be fine. It'll be fixed. Yeah, I for sure felt that way. But I'm going to admit, I had a great childhood. I had a lovely childhood, and I think, well, I know it's because of the people on the outside that stepped in to help our family.
Okay. So a lot of the community pitched
neighbors. We have a very strong extended family. Friends, parents of friends, taking me to school. My grandparents lived with us for every summer for like 5 years. Okay. They always came to live with us while we were out of school. And I got to do the things I really love to do. So I grew up dancing. Okay. And I that was my passion growing up. And I started when I was 4. And then I danced all the way through high school. And I took dance classes into college. But that was my passion. And that was never taken away from me. Which I think is, we struggled financially. But my mom knew that dance was so important to me, right? That she didn't want to take that away from me.
That's awesome.
And we were laughing when I was talking to my mom about this because we couldn't afford tuition, and so we were called like the studio moppers. We cleaned the studio in exchange for tuition, and my mom was so willing to do that.
Wow.
And as a little girl, it taught me that sometimes you have to sacrifice for the things you want.
Yeah, what a great lesson at a young age, even though that's hard. What a lesson. Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, I'm surprised that you knew where you wanted to go to college at such a young age.
It's because
most people are still trying to figure that out. I don't know.
It's because my mom and my dad both went to BYU, and they met at BYU.
Gotcha.
And
so you had this in your mind.
My older brothers we all talked about BYU. And so I did have this idea in my mind, like, I have to go to BYU. I really want to go. And in order to go to BYU, I have to get straight A's in 4th grade, which is not true at all. But I set those really high expectations for myself that just, it wasn't what it really needed to be.
Well, and you mentioned too that you were, like this perfectionist. You wanted to do everything right as best that you could. And how did you handle it when you didn't live up to what you thought was the perfection? Obviously, you mentioned when you failed that, but get a little more detail into that and how that played a part as growing up.
Yeah, I don't think I handled it well. That story in 4th grade, and that's just a glimpse of it. But I almost felt if I didn't do things just so or perfectly, that it had an effect on my worth, or it made me less successful as a person, or just less valuable as a person. And I really didn't see the effects of that until college. And that's where it mostly played into my life. I mean, I set high expectations for myself in elementary school and junior high and high school. And I had my family by me all the time, and I had so much support. But when I left for college and I was almost by myself, that's when I felt that the detrimental effects of trying to be so perfect and do things just so. And when that didn't happen, that's when I didn't cope well with it.
Gotcha. So how did you cope with it?
So this is something I don't talk about a lot. And I've talked about it with my family and with my friends, but I actually had an eating disorder in college.
Okay. Is that when it started?
Yeah, it started after my freshman year of college, and it actually started after I ran a marathon.
Interesting.
And I ran this marathon, and you run a marathon, and I was so healthy, and I was strong and proud of myself for doing that.
Well, yeah, that's
hard.
That is so hard.
I trained so hard for it, and I completed it, and I met my goal in under 4 hours, and I was like ecstatic. But the next week, I remember I just hated my body. I hated the way I looked. I just did not feel good about myself. And that was a week after I made this huge accomplishment, this physical and mental accomplishment. And that summer, I tried to lose weight. I tried to do all these crash diets. And it turned into this cycle in college where I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't feel valuable because I felt like my body wasn't right and something was wrong with my body.
Okay.
And so it turned into this cycle of binge eating a lot of food and then controlling it and not eating and exercising a lot, to binging again and controlling it. And it was this cycle because my body was in turmoil from all of that. And so I felt worse about myself.
Right.
And then I would do those actions again, and then I just felt worse about myself. And I wanted to be perfect, have this perfect, and I had so much turmoil going on inside that I just did not cope with that well at all. Yeah.
Well, so you do this marathon, you're training for this marathon. Was one of the reasons why you did the marathon did you think that's going to help me get in kind of the body that I want? Or, I mean, because were you hating your body? Because you said I hated the way I looked. I mean, a week later, Did the hatred start before the marathon, or?
So I look back into high school, and I didn't worry about that at all. And I think what it might have first started it is just going into college, into this new environment, and there's tons of young adults.
Right.
And I think that's when I started to just slightly compare myself to other people.
Yeah.
What they looked like and how I was similar, different to them, and what I could change to make myself look better. And so I think that was there, but after I finished that marathon, I was like, I just ran this marathon, and it's just like, I don't understand why I still don't like my body. And so I'm not sure when that exactly started, but after that marathon, I just felt horrible about myself. And it wasn't, I mean, I would recommend running to anyone, and I loved that marathon, and I still consider that my like proudest moments of myself.
Yeah, that's an accomplishment.
I just thought it was interesting that I had done something so hard, and yet I still felt so crappy about myself after it.
It hits me too, because I talk a lot about this with clients, and you know this because you do too, is how powerful belief is. Yeah, you do this amazing thing, but you had this belief as you looked at yourself in the mirror, or however you did it, and you were like, I don't like the way I look, and you just believed. Because you mentioned something really, I think that our listeners can relate to, is you started comparing. You just, God, look at how pretty maybe she looks, or I wish I had legs like hers, or whatever you were saying. But that's where it starts. As simple as that, you start comparing, like, or in other words, what you're doing is, I'm not as good as these people.
Yep. And comparing maybe the things I struggle with the most to their very best.
Yeah.
And then that's a huge disconnect.
Yes, it is.
And then I start telling myself that story that, I'm just not good enough and I need to change.
Yeah.
But
so how long did did it continue for a while?
So it continued for quite some time. And this is where my dad's addiction kind of started intertwining into my life in college, because up to that point, life was pretty normal, and I felt pretty sheltered from my dad's addiction.
Right.
But as I got to that age, my freshman and sophomore year, my dad was living in Orem at that time.
Okay.
And he really wanted to come back into mine and my brother's life, where he had been so absent before. So I was growing up, I get to college, and then my dad wants to spend time with me, and I haven't built that connection with him.
Yeah.
And so I started trying to see him more and like spend time with him. But then he would fall off the grid, and then I'd hear that he relapsed from my brothers, because he wouldn't tell me. So I started also telling myself this story that I was going through this personal struggle with food, where I was using that as my coping.
Yeah.
And then there was my dad, who had this addiction, and I started almost like combining those stories, like I was like my dad.
Just like my dad.
I'm just like my dad.
Yeah.
And look, his life is out of control, and I feel like I'm like that too.
Wow.
So I started almost making the excuse that I'm like this because my dad is like this. And I remember, so this struggle, this binging and restricting and overexercising and everything continued up to my senior year of college, which was just like a year and a half ago.
Right.
But I remember my junior year of college, I was trying to study for a test, and that day I'd found out my dad relapsed after like a year of being clean.
Oh, okay.
My brother told me, and I was really struggling with my self-image at that time, with my body, with my eating. And I was trying to study for this test, and I could not study. And I was in the basement of the library at BYU, and I started like bawling, and I was like, I felt so embarrassed. And so I got up and I took off out of the library, and I called my mom, and I was just like, I'm just like dad. Like I just felt so like a victim to the the circumstance he was going through. And
Did your mom know that you were struggling with the eating disorder thing? So she knew this.
She knew.
Okay.
Yeah, she definitely knew.
So when you mentioned, I'm just like Dad, she knew what you were talking about.
She knew what I was talking about.
Okay.
And that freshman year of college is when it began. And I probably didn't tell her. I didn't tell her the whole first summer it was going on. I told her after that summer. But she knew at this point, and I just was so frustrated with what was going on with my dad and the behaviors I was doing. And I said to her, I feel like I'm just like Dad. And I will always remember her saying, you are not your dad, and you have your own distinct choices. You are your own person. And this might be frustrating, but you have the power to choose what you're going to do with your life. And your dad's life is not your life at all.
Great advice in that moment, right?
Yeah. And I think I almost didn't want to hear it because I want to be like, no, this is why I'm doing the things I'm doing.
I'm a victim.
Yeah, I'm a victim to it. But that I felt like was the spark that kind of helped me change my thinking and my story. Okay. And eventually my behaviors.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like you got a really good mom.
Yes,
who's not afraid to tell you the truth, and and all those things she did, sacrificing when you were growing up, and allowing you to be in dance and those kind of things.
My mom is amazing.
So you had that moment where she says these things, and it was kind of like, okay, kind of a wake up call. So let's talk a little bit about what did you do, and did you go seek help, or did you just start just working on you yourself? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I had gone to see some counselors prior, but I don't think I was in the place to really change at that point, because I was telling myself this story, and I really just did not like myself, that I didn't feel like I wanted to change. I kind of wanted to be stuck in this rut. I wanted that excuse to be stuck in that rut. But I felt like after that point, it really came back to the beliefs and the story I was telling myself. Yeah. And I realized that it wasn't so much about the food, but about what I thought about my worth and who I thought I was as a person. And so I kind of just tried to just take the food out of the picture and be like, okay, why am I not okay with who I am as a person right now, and what's going on there? And it really had to start from the ground up of, do I like who I am when I look in the mirror? And at that time I didn't. And so I had to learn how just to love myself again, no matter what my weight looked like. Yeah. No matter what the outward appearance looked like, because your outward appearance and your worth as a person aren't the same thing. And so I did see some counselors. I talked it over with my friends a lot. Okay. I actually had a friend who I didn't know was struggling with the same thing, and she was on her mission, and I felt I should reach out to her. She was on her LDS mission, and I reached out to her, and she actually sent back, and she's like, I'm struggling with this thing. And it was like exactly what I was struggling with, but I didn't tell her I was struggling with that. So I was able to make this connection with someone really close to me who had a similar experience, and she helped me a lot through that, just having someone to confide in and talk things over with.
So it sounds like you were pretty open with it.
Yeah,
I mean, seems like it. Is that correct?
I feel more open with it now, but most of the time it was just my mom who knew. Okay. And then my brothers knew something was going on, so I ended up telling them. Okay. Then my stepdad, and then it wasn't probably until a year ago that I confided in like my other friends, my other really close friends, the one that didn't have the similar issue. And now I'm talking about it on the podcast today.
Which, by the way, I admire you for being vulnerable and being willing to share this.
Yeah, and so it took me a while to become more open about it. Yeah. Because I had this shame about it, which was totally unnecessary. Right. And that kept me from being authentic with other people about it until I could take that shame away and just be honest. But I feel like I can be open about it now because I love who I am today, and I know my worth and my value, and I know that it has nothing to do with what I look like. So
that's good that you got to that awareness, right? And that took a minute for you to get there. So what would you say, when you think of your belief now, what would you say it is?
I think my belief now is that I'm a strong individual, and I'm a powerful individual.
Right.
And I have the ability to choose. And for a long time, when I told my story about that with my dad, I was taking away that choice because I wanted to be a victim to that. But now I realize that I choose what I do in this life, and I have that power to choose. And I just think that I love myself, and I love what I'm doing with my life, and I'm successful even though I'm not perfect.
Right.
And I'm valuable even though I'm not perfect, and I
Gotcha.
never will be perfect, and that is a-okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love what you said about how choice and how powerful choice is. I think, and I'm just going to insert this here a little bit, is I think we take that gift that we have to choose for granted. I think we don't really even understand how powerful a decision really is,
Yeah.
And I love it what your mom said to you in that moment, right? Yeah, you maybe didn't want to hear it in that moment, but it was like this wake up call, like, okay, I'm in charge almost. Like, if I'm going to change this, I've got to do something, It's not, and so seeing how you decided to choose to look at yourself differently, tell yourself a different story, which at first you didn't fully believe.
Yeah.
But I love that you said that, because I think, especially for our listeners, how powerful a decision truly is, and what that can do. And it changes everything if you want it to.
Yeah. And I think that the reason why sometimes we don't want to believe we have that choice is because it gives us responsibility. Yeah. It's that awareness that brings that self-accountability and that responsibility for our life. And if we tell the story that we don't have that power to choose, then we almost allow ourselves to lose that responsibility and that accountability.
Very beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I want to talk let's talk about, obviously your dad was going through an addiction throughout your childhood and even to this moment.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that and how that's been for you. And I know you've shared a little bit, but let's get a little more into that. It's just how
details of that.
The details around that, if you don't mind.
So do you want me to just kind of explain a little bit more of the childhood aspect of it and up to today?
Yeah, just more of how you dealt with it as a kid. Because yes, you were that girl who was working hard, making sure everything's perfect, and
yeah,
and you are a hard worker. I mean, I've been around you. I mean, you're a go-getter, and you're positive, and you're energetic, and you get things done, and I love that. But I mean, I guess I want our listeners to understand, like, who they may be dealing with a loved one who has an addiction and they just seem to never quit or can't get off of it or whatever. Just your feelings around that and how you and your family, I guess, kind of coped and dealt with that.
Yes. So I said he began using when I was 5 years old, and he went to a treatment center here in Utah at that time. And I remember going to a family session at that treatment center. And that's one of the earliest memories I had with my dad was going to that session, and the therapist read a book about a dinosaur, and every time the dinosaur lied, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he was really just speaking to the children in the room, which was me and my brothers. But I remember that book about that lying.
That's interesting. Isn't
that interesting?
That is.
Don't lie, because the dinosaur gets bigger. But so my childhood, my dad was very in and out.
Okay.
So he'd be here in Utah, then he'd be in California, and then he'd be in Alaska, and then he'd come back to Utah, and he'd want to see us, and it was just like there was no consistency between where we would see him or how long we'd see him for. And he spent a year in prison in Alaska. And so I remember there was that whole year of not really even hearing from him. No
contact, right.
And then he also spent some time in jail here in Utah. And I actually just opened a letter that he sent this morning from while he was in jail, and I read it, and I have not read it for...
Really? You read it this morning?
I read it this morning, and he wrote it in 2012. And I read it this morning, and it just kind of brought back what was going on at that time. But so there was a lot of inconsistency growing up between what my dad was doing and what he said he was going to do. But as I said earlier, I'm so grateful because I feel like there was that inconsistency with my dad, but so much consistency with other people in my life.
Right.
Like I said, my mom, my two brothers, my mom didn't get remarried till I was, I want to say 12. I don't remember the exact, but between that time, there's so much consistency between other family members, everyone's stepping in and helping to make life just as normal as possible for a child my age. And I feel so grateful for that because I feel like a lot of people who have a parent who is that inconsistent and who's going through those major problems, they can't almost be a child anymore. There's so much that takes them away from it. But I got to almost stay in this little childhood bubble,
right?
And dance and play tennis and hang out with my friends, and it was because of the people who just supported us, right, so willingly.
Oh, that's amazing that people stepped up to that, and especially your mom, even having to do that on her own a little bit. And I want to go back to that letter. Just drop that on us.
Yeah.
Now you don't have to share details around it if you don't want to, but I mean. Here you are reading it for the first time. Is that did I hear that right?
Well, I read it in 2012.
Oh, okay.
No, I read it in 2012. So 7 years ago.
Okay.
But I read it this morning for the first time since that 7 years ago.
Did anything stand out to you in the letter or anything that you feel?
Yes. So I was just skimming over it, and my dad wrote in the letter, he said that my brother Casey, hi Casey, if you're listening. Hello, Casey.
Hello, Casey. Shout out to Casey here.
My brother Casey had written him while he was there, and my dad said Casey wrote this in his letter, and I'm gonna try to get this on the head of what he said, but Casey in his letter said, this is such my brother, but he said, You made a stupid mistakes and you're in a bad place. And by a bad place, I mean you're not with Tessa. And Tessa should have been your first priority.
Oh, wow.
And so there's my brother saying that to my dad. And it makes me tear up a little bit because I'm just so... To see my older brothers... their love for me, and they were so protective of me and wanted me to feel safe and secure, and my dad wasn't offering that, and they just flat out told him, like, you should be there for Tessa and you're not, but we're gonna be there for Tessa.
Wow.
And I don't remember the rest of the letter, but because that part to me was like highlighted and bold, and I was like, I'm so loved by my family. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Wow. That is so, what a blessing to, again, to have brothers and mom and family and the neighbors and everyone just rallying around you. And, it's interesting too, like, you even said it, you look at your childhood as a really, really good childhood.
Yeah.
Loved it. Here's a question I ask often to my guests on this is, would you change anything?
No. I honestly would not change a thing about my childhood. As difficult as it was at times, I'm grateful for all the moments.
I love that.
I loved my childhood, and I grew up in an awesome neighborhood. We used to play night games with the kids, and
Yeah.
I had really good friends, and I honestly feel like I had one of the best childhoods,
Wow,
despite
that's awesome.
what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It goes with what we say a lot here, life happens for you,
Oh, yes.
you
Yeah.
know, which means we learn, we grow from it. It's a
Mm-hmm.
blessing ultimately. And we may not feel that in the moment
Mm-hmm.
that we're going through something hard, but when we can look back and go, hey, well, yeah, that was hard, but look who I am
Mm-hmm.
today, and look what I'm doing today because of it.
Yeah.
And now here you are helping so many people with what you do here at Wasatch.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I love that you're helping people experience fun and joy in their life
Mm-hmm.
again.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
I love it, and I love that life happens for you, and I truly believe that. And just going back to the childhood piece, I think a major important factor of why I felt I had such a good childhood is because my mom helped us realize to focus on the things we did have versus those things that we didn't have. And so there was just so much gratitude for the help we did have and the
Right.
home we had, and my brothers and her, and just that connection we had. And as I was talking to my mom about this last night, she's like, the most important thing for me as your mother was to just move forward.
Right.
And not get caught up in what was going on with your dad, because she wanted us to realize that we had our own lives to live.
Right.
Despite what he was doing, if he was regressing, if he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, we could be doing all we could do in that moment, and just move forward,
Yeah.
being grateful for the things we did have.
Wow. Again, did you learn that? This was kind of your mom's example in this?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think so. And just my mom and my brothers, and I think I learned a lot by example as a child.
right.
Because we didn't talk about things a lot, which is maybe why I struggled so much in college, is because I finally got curious about things and started asking
Yeah.
questions. But we just moved forward the best we could.
Yeah.
And I also love that when we did talk about my dad, and when we did have those discussions,
Yeah.
we never shamed him. My mom never made me feel like he was a bad person.
Right.
It was never like, wow, your dad is horrible or anything like that. There was no shame behind it. It was just like, this is what's going on with your dad, and I'll let his consequences speak for themselves.
Right.
And so I never had this discussion with my mom, drugs are bad or anything. I just looked at my dad and what was going on, and I knew I don't want that for myself.
Don't want that for yourself.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing that you had that awareness, and your mom had that awareness
Mm-hmm.
to teach you guys that, and not to shame them. I think it's important to point out, because maybe listeners don't understand this, because I work with a lot of clients who don't understand the difference
Mm-hmm.
between guilt and shame.
Oh, yep.
Guilt is we've done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Shame is I'm wrong or I'm
Mhm.
bad,
Yeah.
right? Shame's not a good place to be. Guilt can be good because it reminds us not to do it again.
Yeah.
But it shows the maturity of your mom to be able to say, hey, we're not going to talk bad about him. Yes, he's doing some things that are bad,
Mm-hmm.
but he's a good guy who's
Yeah.
just struggling through this. And we see it every day here at
Mhm.
Wasatch, don't we? They're good people.
I know.
They're
We're
amazing.
how did you get here? What is going on?
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that difference between guilt and shame, and that, I mean, he always said I feel guilty for this, and my dad does have a lot of shame, and I
Yeah.
think that's a major difficulty for him.
Sure.
He lives with a lot of shame. But we talk about that at home too, that idea of guilt and shame, and
Right.
my brother says it all the time. He's in that exact definition. He'll bring that up, and just being
awesome.
like, guilt promotes growth,
Yeah.
and shame just keeps you in the
Paralyze
same
you.
place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're stuck.
Mhm.
It's like a victim stance.
Yep.
Really.
It really is.
I love that. So, you know, how do you think, like right now with your job you're currently at, because you're working with addicts all day long,
Yeah.
and how is going through what you've gone through with your dad and just that whole situation helped you with what you do here at Wasatch?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I initially came into this field because I was like, I have this experience with my dad, and I want to help individuals like my dad and what happened with my dad. And that's kind of what got me to this population.
Yeah.
And I think it does help me just being able to understand maybe what they're going through and what their families are going through. But I think now I don't really connect my father's situation with what I do with work.
Okay.
I think now
which is probably a good thing.
And right? I have, at this point, there's a lot of disconnect with my relationship between me and my dad, and we can talk about that in a second, but I just think now I come into work and I don't make that connection with, I just want to help people be the best versions of themselves, and I more connect it with my story with like that eating disorder, and realizing how much good can come from feeling just strong and healthy and happy with who you are as an individual. And a lot of that can come through what you do recreationally. Yeah. And I'm sure you know that because you run, like you probably get, happiness from those runs and just being able. And so I connect it more with my own struggles than I do with that. My dad.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's probably that's a healthy thing for you to do it that way. And, because I do see you, work with these clients, and you do have a really good, strong connection with them all. And, and it's just great how you relate to them. And so that's why I asked the question, but the way you said it was beautifully said. And I think that's awesome.
Well, I think the addiction with the dad and what I went through in college, they both helped me to have better understanding of what these people are going through, and just to share like how I personally feel you can overcome those poor beliefs and those poor stories you tell yourself and become more powerful.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a really tough question. Okay. If there's one thing you could tell your dad, if somehow he's hearing this today, what would you tell him right now?
I knew you were gonna.
You knew it, huh?
I knew you were gonna ask that question.
You're like, I'm hoping he doesn't go there.
And I didn't even think about an answer because I was like, but.
I know it's a tough one, and you don't have to answer that if you don't want to. But
no, I want to answer it. I would tell him that I want him to get better for himself. Okay. And I want him to be happy with his own life. I want him to get to the moment where he can look in the mirror and feel satisfied with the reflection he sees.
Ooh, I love that.
And not feel shame about what happened with certain things, and not live in the past and feel this regret with the family, because we are okay, but I want him to be okay. Wow. So that's probably what I tell him.
That's, very well said again. And thanks for answering the question. I know it's a tough one, but what a great message, and, that you would share with him. And I think that's great. And, I think he would really appreciate actually hearing that in that way, and, so thank you so much. I wanted to also ask, and we talked a little bit about this before we started, is, if you could give a challenge or some advice to our listeners, maybe someone's listening to this that has an eating disorder, or they have a family member who's struggling with drugs or whatever. Can you give us, give our listeners some advice on that?
Yeah. I think my challenge, or just kind of the point of the whole discussion for me, is to be just a sense of gratitude.
Okay.
Gratitude for, like we said, the things that have happened for you, and maybe switching from that for you mentality instead of thinking things are happening to you. And if you have someone who is struggling with addiction, or you are struggling with your own eating disorder, or this just poor coping skill in general, just talking to someone about it and being authentic. And I think that's where I struggled for a while, is I didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
And I felt my own shame about what was going on.
Okay.
And once you break down that wall, that shame barrier, and you're willing to be authentic about it and to talk about it with other people, that's where a lot can change. And then gratitude with that is just realizing this experience I'm having is going to benefit me if I allow it to.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. Great advice, great challenge. I mean, gratitude's amazing. When, like you said, we can't feel shame and gratitude, I don't think, at the same time.
No.
Can you?
I don't believe so. If you know anyone.
Yeah. I just think it's impossible. So if, again, that gratitude piece is very, very important. And I think it does keep us from playing, the victim in that shame stance. Yes. Like what you said about guilt, it progresses us forward to do better and to be better. But great advice. I love it.
Yeah. And just along with that, being okay with who you are at the moment, but I also just think, like, once we are completely okay with where we are at, that's when we can promote change.
Right.
And continue to just progress in this life and challenge ourselves, is when we understand our worth in this moment at this time. And then that's where the change can come from.
Yeah. Great. That's awesome. Awesome. Well, I got to thank you for being willing to do this.
Yeah.
I didn't know your whole story, and you even said you're going to hear some things today that I haven't shared much. And so I got to tell you how much I'm inspired by you. I'm inspired by what you've said and what you've been through, and to be willing to share this on this Belief Cast today really means a lot to me. And I know our listeners will really appreciate this as well. And so I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, and for just giving this platform, because I think it might be helpful to other people, but it honestly was very helpful to me.
Oh, cool.
Because I haven't shared this with a lot of people, but I feel like at this time, like I'm good with sharing it. So I'm very grateful to you for letting me do this.
Oh, you betcha. And I really think you should share it more often. And there's so many people that can benefit from what you said today. It's really amazing. If someone wants to maybe reach out to you that who's going through the same struggles, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
So I'm on Facebook. I'm old school on Facebook, which I just activated again. So, and I will keep that open. But again, my name is Tessa Yates, and then my email is Tessa Yates. Should I spell that out?
Spell it out, yeah.
So it's TESSAYATES96@gmail.com.
Great.
So those are probably the best ways, Facebook or email.
Awesome.
I also work with Todd, so if you want to ask Todd, he can refer to, I don't know.
Yeah. If you can't get a hold of her for some reason, reach out to me. I'm happy to send the message to Tessa. And so, if you have any questions, or if you want to just ask her anything, or even thank her for being willing to share her story, please reach out to her. I encourage you to do that. There'll be many avenues that people will be able to hear this today. And so, but again, thank you so much, Tessa. This was awesome.
Todd. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, listeners. And again, thank you to Veracity Networks for the sponsorship of this. And, listeners, we wouldn't be doing this if no one was listening. So
thank you, listeners.
Yes, so grateful that we have people who are willing to download this and share it. So we ask you to continue, and thank you for your support. And we'll till next time, right?
Yes.
Thanks, Tessa.